All right, now, joining us, though, to talk about economic, financial matters, what we should be all thinking about, is Craig Stobo, and he joins us now. Craig, where do we find you this weekend, my friend?
I'm in Central Auckland, CBD, ahead of a meeting at 12 o'clock, so thank you for inviting me to your show this morning.
No, thank you always for joining us. What appeared on your radar this week as important in the financial economic realm?
Well, I actually want to tell you a story. For the first time, I made a submission to the select committee of Parliament this morning. I've never done that before, and it was to the Defence, Foreign Affairs and Trade Committee. I was allocated 5 minutes, and I put my submission in on time last week, and my submission was around concerns I have, which I briefly expressed on the show a while ago, around us ratifying the NZ-EU free trade agreement that has moved through a series of negotiations and now has to be ratified by New Zealand. So I was in front of a select committee this morning for the first time.
Which one? Which free trade agreement was that one?
The EU, European Union.
Oh, the European
free trade
Union
agreement.
Yeah, okay.
It's quite a big song and dance, and the select committee broke for the tragic death of one of the MPs in Parliament. So I was scheduled to go earlier week, but it was delayed till today. Anyway, I had 5 minutes, so I just want to go through a few things that I think might be of interest to your audience. The first question I asked was, why are Maori afforded special privileges at the expense of other New Zealanders in this FTA? And I refer to a particular article which says, quote, these cooperation activities between the EU and New Zealand may include collaborating to enhance the ability for Maori-owned enterprises to access and benefit from the trade and investment opportunities created in this agreement. And I asked the committee, why only Maori-owned enterprises? What is the definition of a Maori-owned enterprise? Indeed, what is the definition of a Maori? That's my first point. And I think this is really important for the broader societal discussions we're having right now. And it's repeated in another theme in another part of the agreement, or proposed agreement. Secondly, I asked, what are the potential compensation costs required to be paid to the EU if New Zealand does not meet its 2030 Paris commitments?
Right.
There's an article in there. There's an article in there, 19.6, which refers to the fact that each party shall effectively implement their Paris Agreement, including commitments with regard to nationally determined contributions. And then the compensation framework's laid out later on. But why do we commit to the stuff when we have a very strong possibility that we won't meet the Paris Agreement? What are we going to have to pay to these guys? In addition to having to buy carbon units in the European market as a means of complying with Paris 2030. And the last point I asked was that there's a reference in there to working on circular economy issues, but there's no definition of what a circular economy is. Anyway, I read this out for 3 or 4 minutes. I repeated it because I wanted the audience to hear what I had to say rather than summarising it. And then I got a series of questions, and increasingly the questions were not about answering my questions, but who I was and where did I come from. And it was like, well, hang on, aren't we focused on the message and the questions rather than the messenger? It was really weird, and I felt as though they didn't want to answer the core questions, which are sitting there for all of us to think about. I felt, is this the way select committees work? They ask context about who you are and why you're coming from this particular position rather than answering the questions. So I thought that was a great sort of entree to this session around having these discussions around our society and the rights and privileges of all of us as expressed in Article 3, for example, of the treaty, and yet this document clearly singles out one group of us for special treatment. And I was trying to be told, well, this is in addition to all the other clauses. And I said, well, if all the other clauses apply to everybody, why do you need this addition? And the answer was, well, a lot of Maori enterprises are involved in primary production exports. I said, well, lots of other people are, but why don't you single out Chinese New Zealanders or Pacifica New Zealanders? I didn't get an answer.
Where did you get your questioning from, though, Craig? Was it one from one side of that table?
Yeah, Penny Hanare and Damien O'Connor. Yeah. And they got shut down, I think, by Tim, the convener of the select committee, because we're running out of time. But I felt it was about who I was and where I was coming from as opposed to answering the questions. It's extraordinary.
Having said that,
Anyway.
your pedigree is, or certainly your business and commercial and economic pedigree is oh God, wouldn't mind having it, Craig, just quietly. Was that not relevant to them when you told them who I am? You are?
I opened up with explaining that I was a professional director and business owner. And then they were asking, well, what are your professional directorships and what are the businesses that you own? I like none of your business, but I explained New Zealand Windfarms and I explained local government funding agency and previously precinct property. So I gave them a sense of, background, but I don't think that's actually important. I think the questions are important, not who you are.
Yeah,
anyway, I thought that just kind of weird, really weird.
Yes,
maybe that's politics, Michael.
No, I mean, what they were trying to do was they didn't like what you were saying, so they wanted to attack you as an individual and suggest that you really didn't have sufficient credibility to be able to be making those submissions. Yeah,
pretty much. And I told them it was irrelevant at the end. Yeah. So we'll see where that goes. I think it's important that the public knows we're signing agreements with these commitments that I don't think New Zealanders would agree with. So we need to have this debate past the select committee into the various readings in Parliament. I hope other parliamentarians pick it up, which is good.
Well, I mean, you've got a different government now that negotiated this agreement to start with. I guess the thing that I'd ask, and you've actually been on Foreign Affairs, I mean, here's the great irony, you're a diplomat yourself. The national interest analysis that was done by New Zealand Foreign Affairs and Trade to do with this free trade agreement with the European Union, we've signed it subject to ratification, I take, by Parliament.
Correct. That's right.
I'm presuming that the original agreement was signed off by the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the day. Is that right? It would have.
I would have thought. I absolutely would have led the final presentation of that in a form that went to the EU. And I can't recall whether they've not only signed but ratified or not, and we're the second party to ratify. I can't remember the sequence, but absolutely it was part of the Foreign Affairs portfolio of the previous Foreign Minister. That's correct.
Right. So the bit that I'm interested in is how realistic is it? In other words, did you just appear in a sort of show trial, or is there a genuine attempt, do you think, to amend aspects of this free trade agreement by Parliament, or is this just a process that Parliament's going through?
Well, ultimately, Parliament chooses, doesn't it? So if the current coalition decides not to ratify it, but go back to amend various clauses which, in the EU's mind, may not be important, and we just make those amendments as per the ones that I described. And I didn't hear all the other submissions that were going on before and after my presentation, so there may be other issues that have been brought up. But it's incumbent upon Parliament to say, is this in the best interest of all New Zealanders? And if it's not, we should ask for those clauses to be deleted. Don't think that upsets the broader free trade agreement at all. It just sets a tone that means it's for all New Zealanders. And by the way, we don't want to put in place commitments to pay you money if we don't meet Paris 2030.
Yes, I think that's the big one there too, actually, possibly even more than the Maori businesses one, although, I mean, you're talking about unfair treatment, which is fair enough. Inequity is always an issue and you don't want it written into a trade agreement.
Well, that's right.
But, and then does that mean that we are going to advantage us in all future trade agreements as well? Obviously, a precedent is being set.
Yeah,
can I just ask, though, Craig, that when you would have been through it, was there a quantification for the sums of money that potentially we're up for to the EU if we don't meet our Paris Protocol? No?
No, and that's part of the issue. It's not quantified. It relies on a complaint from the EU. So it depends on the political colours of the EU at the time, doesn't it? If they think that New Zealand needs to pull its socks up, they have this right under the agreement to put in place a process to seek compensation, which, you think, it would never be exercised. Well, then why put it into the agreement?
Yes, and I guess the other aspect of that is that could only have been at the behest, of the European Union that section's in there. I can't imagine us doing it. And that would be there.
I'm not so sure about that.
Really?
I'm not so sure about that because, I'm asking the question, is this for a domestic audience too, which is putting more pressure on us to get to 2030. I'm not so sure about that. I don't know. You'd have to ask the various participants in the drafting of the agreement from our side. I just don't know.